Hi, my name is Sabne Raznik. You have found the channel here on YouTube where I do what I call mini readings. I call them that because it's just one poem. Sometimes it's my work if I'm promoting something. Usually it's somebody else's. That's why this channel has never been monetized, so that I could share the poise joie of other people's work without violating copyrights. Where I can get the permission of the poet, I do. Um, and where I can't, we're just sharing joy. Today we're going to do a tribute for Michael Longley, who passed away back in January 2025. I am filming this. Put my tablet that I'm using as a camera in front of what tells me what the date is, but I believe it's like the 8th of March 2025 or something like that. I'm guessing. It can't be much later than that. So I like to say the date because I sometimes I film in blocks, not always, but sometimes I film like several videos on the same day and then put them up once a month in order to keep the schedule regular, because I have chronic health issues. I'm a disabled person, and that way I can keep the schedule regular. But sometimes what ends up happening is that videos don't get put up for sometimes 6 months later, and in that case we can lose track of, it gets really confusing, and sometimes videos will get lost in the storage, and I'll find them forever later and be like, oh my goodness, so it's helpful to note the recording date somewhere in the video for myself, so I can be like, oh my goodness, I really need to post that one. For instance, this morning I was going through, since I was going to go ahead and make this one as a tribute video. I've done that several times this year already, and get it out. I was like, well, let me go back and see how many videos I've made and see what the backlog is. I've got videos in my storage waiting to go up that were made back in July of 2024, June and July of 2024. So that I've forgotten what poem is even contained in the video. So I'm going to need to go ahead and get those up at some point real soon. But you'll be seeing those eventually. You'll be seeing those eventually. But when it comes to these tribute videos, I don't want to let like a huge amount of time pass before I get the tribute up. As you can see with Michael Longley, it's already been a couple months. And so I don't like to let a huge amount of time pass with the tribute videos, and so some of these older videos end up getting pushed even further back so that we have a moment to put out the tribute videos. And so, yeah, things get a little bit confusing there with the backlog, but we will eventually get all the videos out. I mean, I'm sure as far as you're concerned, it all looks the same on your end. But on my end, it gets confusing and things can sometimes get lost. So I need to get things a little more organized again and back together. But anyway, our tribute video for Michael Longley, he was, of course, one of the Northern Ireland poets writing during the Troubles, when the Troubles was at its height, during it started in the 60s. It was real bad during the 70s and 80s. Finally came to an end during the 90s, long enough for a whole generation to grow up in the midst of terrorism there in Northern Ireland. And so there was a whole generation of poets writing during that time, and in the last 10 years or so, that generation has been dying. And it was a generation of poets that I grew up reading. I've always been very interested in Ireland. I grew up as a U2 fan, I was born in 1979, so I grew up listening to U2 when they were in their younger years, talking about the Troubles and stuff. They would come to America and do these shows and talk about the Troubles. So I grew up with with the Troubles pretty much, even though I'm from the U.S. And so I grew up with these Northern Irish poets writing about the Troubles too, because I was hearing it from YouTube when they would do their shows, and then so I got interested in it. It was like, well, what is this that they're talking about? You know, I'm not really into politics really. I mean, I was as a child, because I was very much into the disability rights movement as a child, and very much in the forefront of it as a child. As I got older, not so much. I think I got tired of the whole duplicitous nature. And when you're in the forefront of the civil rights movement, it's very violent, as I'm sure those who were alive during the push for the civil rights movement in the 60s can attest. The African American civil rights movement can attest. It's very violent for those who are at the forefront. I've had my fair share of being under people's fists as a child, under people's fists. I've been seeing a lot about Ruby Bridges as the first African American child to be integrated into white schools. That was my experience, only I was a disabled child being integrated into able-bodied kids' schools. That was basically my job as part of the disability rights movement. I was one of those children. I can't claim being the first, but I was the first locally. And so that was my experience, and it was rough. A lot of bullying. It was violent. It was ugly all the way through till I left school. And all I can say is, next generation, tag your it, and on through, tag your it, and tag your it, and tag your it. Each generation has to continue fighting to keep the civil rights that we fought for. Not only to keep the civil rights we already fought for, but also to continue the fight to improve the situation as each generation goes. But tag your it is all I can say, because tired, and at this point I'm too sick to continue to do it myself, but I mean, there is some truth to it. Being a young, there's a reason why warriors, even in the Middle Ages, would prefer to die on the battlefield, because when you get old, and you have all those battle wounds, and I mean, you feel every bruise you ever got when you get older. Ouchie. Ouch, ouch, ouch. It is a young man's war. War is a young man's game. And so tag your it. But anyway, so, and now it's like, I've kind of washed my hands of politics and all of that. But yeah, so I grew up, my point being, I grew up reading all these Northern Irish poets, and now so they're all passing off the scene. Seamus Heaney being the most diplomatic of them all. He kind of was very careful, whatever you say nothing. Tried real hard not to choose a side, and yet he kind of did at the same time. And then there was some of the more fiery ones that very definitely chose a side, and etc. and so forth. But then there's Michael Longley. They all had, each one had their own distinct personality, their own distinct take on the situation. I'm going to read Michael Longley's poem Ceasefire. And I got this from the poetryarchive.org site. I will note that in the description somewhere. It will be there if you want to read the poem yourself. And of course, I'm sure it's in his collected poems. He has a collected poems out there. Ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed, and for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles, built like a god, Priam, good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed. I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. So, and that was not an unusual thing to do, to take these scenes from Greek storytelling and read in them allegories for the situation that they were in. Seamus Heaney did that quite often. He would actually literally translate from the Greek, because at that time, this generation also was the last generation to be educated in the Victorian way, by which I mean where you get taught Latin and Greek and translate directly from the Latin and Greek manuscripts and stuff like that. You get what's considered the classical education, right? They were the last generation to receive that through the British educational system. After that, it switched over to the kind of education we're more familiar with today as being, the 20th century education, or the kind of education I got. And I don't know what they're learning in school now because, but Michael Longley, Seamus Heaney, and all them, they were given the classic education, so classical education. So they learned Latin, they learned Greek, they learned to translate from the original manuscripts, just like the Victorians, just like Tennyson and Yeats and Byron and Keats and Shelley, and they were the last generation to do that. So, like, Heaney did this a lot. What Longley is doing here, only Heaney would translate directly from the text, and actually it was interesting because whenever Heaney wrote his 9/11 tribute poem, the September 11 attacks. When he wrote his 9/11 tribute poem, it was a found poem. They call it a found poem when it's not your own words, it's lifted from another text. It was a found poem that was a translation from a Greek text. So this was something Heaney did a lot. And now we have Longley doing it, pretty much, as he's lifting this from a Greek text, obviously, about Troy, and calling it Ceasefire, and we are meant to, it's not stated explicitly, of course, but we are meant to make the leap that this is an allegory for the Troubles. That's what's happening here. And we know it's an allegory for the Troubles because of the other things that he wrote, right? Just like we knew that Seamus was using that translated text as his tribute for the September 11 attacks because of the specific text that he chose, for instance, and things like that. And just use your brain. So that's what's going on here. But it's kind of like, it's been a hard time for people of a certain generation, like a lot of the people that they grew up, I won't say emulating because that's not the word, But you know, like people that they saw a lot on TV or listened to in the radio a lot, um, have been passing. Movie stars, people like that. Just their pop culture references. Their pop culture references. Um, and for me, I'm having kind of the same experience is happening with me, but it's happening in terms of the people I grew up reading. The people I grew up reading. So, excuse me. Guess that's why I have this water here. Huh? I still have some bottled water laying around because we had spring floods this year, which we have every year. Usually in February, sometimes later in the year, but usually February. This year they were exceptionally fierce, and they were our biggest floods we have had since they put in this system of dams and cities built. What we call cities around here, which really aren't cities, they're more like small towns, but they built flood wall systems and put in gates and um, all of that to try to keep this from happening. But it was the biggest flood we've had since 1957 and 1977. Everything's measured against 1977. Um, Before all of that system was put into, and you know, before the cut through system in Pikeville, everybody's heard about that because it was like the biggest engineering project in the United States, I think, that literally moved a mountain and moved a river. um, it was before 1977 flood was before all of that, and all of that was meant to stop 1977 from ever happening again. Well, the 2025 spring floods were so big that the river crested 4 feet below 1977. Everything is measured by 77. Crested 4 feet below 77 in the city of Pikeville. So, um, really tested that system of dams and flood walls and cut throughs and everything that they've done since then, literally moving mountains and rivers and everything to keep that from happening again. Uh, serious flood. Really did some major damage. Um, and tested the system really for the first time ever. I remember the flood in '84. I was in kindergarten when that happened, and that was the second biggest flood since they put that whole system in. The first time they really ever had to use the flood wall in Pikeville. And I was living in this same town when that happened in '84, and lived further up on the hill though than I do now. I still live on high ground though, which is what saved me, but we lived even higher up then. Um, I remember then school was out for so long in '84 that we ended up going on Saturdays to make up the lost time. This time, I don't remember how long we were out though. I just remember having to go to school on Saturday. Um, this time, school has been out. It's going to go back in on Monday. It starts back Monday, which is the 10th. Um, which means it's been out almost a full month, and they're having, in order to go back on the 10th, they're having to modify the bus routes because the bus still can't get up to certain places. Certain places are still washed out so bad the bus can't get up there. So I didn't even think about this when I put it on, but if you have seizure disorders, I just realized that it's flashy on the screening. I'll throw that behind. Because if you have seizure disorders, I just realized that mirror effect on the camera might not be healthy for you, and that's something I did not even think about until I was on screen just now and I saw the flash across the camera screen. I will think about that in future. I don't think it would be as big a deal in person. It's just the effect on camera. I think about those things now that I have a seizure disorder myself. They still don't know what triggers it, but as of right now, the medication does have it under control. But yeah, like I said, I don't think it would be as big a deal in person, but it's just the camera effect. But they're having to modify the bus routes because some of the areas are washed out. So the kids are going to have to walk out to the bus if they can and stuff like that. It's been a time. But anyway, we had no water for a long time because the whole county flooded. Well, not just the whole county, it was the entire region. It was like parts of West Virginia, parts of Tennessee, the whole area. And my county was hit the hardest, and it was a whole county, but it was like everywhere. And I mean, as far away from us as like Welch, West Virginia, and it's like the whole of Central Appalachia, basically. And so the whole county here relies on pretty much the same city water system, which is a whole story in and of itself that starts with mountaintop removal, strip mining. That's a whole video in and of itself that I could preach on for 100 years. It makes me mad. So the whole county, through no fault of our own, through the greed of King Cole, ended up being totally dependent on the same water system. And so when the flood came, it ripped out almost the whole system. And, I mean, literally ripped the water pipes out of the ground in places. So, in order for them to fix that, they had to go through and literally walk the lines, line to line to line, across the entire county. So, most people were without water for almost this whole month. I was fortunate because I was like one of the first people to get water back. But even though we had water where we could like flush our commodes and stuff for most of the time, I think for like the first week we didn't have any. So we had to figure it out. And we did. We couldn't drink it though because we were like on a boiled water advisory until like when this past Wednesday, till like a few days ago. But we were fortunate to get running water back like a week after it happened, when most people had to wait almost the whole month because they had to go through the whole county and walk every line, and put some back, and then they would get it fixed, and then there would be like a rock slide or a mudslide, and it would tear it up back again, and it was a mess. So I ended up with a whole lot of bottled water around the house because the FEMA would come in and the National Guard, and they'd be handing out water, thank goodness, and these disaster boxes that would have like water and canned chili and finger foods and these little things of deodorant and stuff in case you lost it. And what I thought was really nice is that some of them had like paperback copy of the Book of Romans and John from the Bible, and I thought, well, that's nice because this is Appalachian. I guess they're thinking if you lost everything, maybe you lost your family Bible. And it being Appalachia in the Bible Belt, that was thoughtful, And I also thought it was thoughtful that the canned chili had the pop top, so you didn't have to worry about how am I going to open this can, There was some thought put into it. I appreciated that. And so, they've really been working hard to make sure that people have clothes and stuff, and it's amazing to see the outpouring of love. Like here when North Carolina went through what they did with Helene, people were getting together and sending truckloads of stuff to North Carolina, and now we've had this happen to us, and North Carolina's been sending stuff up to us. And it's like this, it's like breathing, They had a disaster, we sent stuff to them, they're still recovering from Helene, and then we have this disaster and they send stuff up to us. It's beautiful. But finally got our water to where we don't have to boil, and they handed out these things which I thought was really, really cool. It was called Water by Women, and it's a 5-gallon bucket water filtration system. The only thing it lacked was like a lid on top, but you pour water in the top and it filters out the bottom, and that way you didn't have to boil it anymore. And I was like, oh, that's really awesome. And it didn't, I mean, it filtered by gravity, gravity running out the bottom. So it didn't have like a whole lot of pressure, but it was really handy. It made things a lot easier because that bowl, because it wasn't just the normal boil water advisory. You had to like boil for 3 minutes and then soak stuff in bleach, and it was a really big deal. But if you had, that's my phone if you can hear that telling me don't forget to take my medicine, but I already did this morning. But I have that on there for in case I forget. But anyway, but it made things a whole lot easier because if you had that 5-gallon filtration bucket thing, then you wouldn't have to do all that where you boil for 3 minutes and then bleach water, and you just run it through that, and then in 20 minutes you have 5 gallons of water you can drink and cook and wash your hands with and brush your teeth with and stuff. And I cleaned mine up and put it under the sink, so if anything happens again, I'll just pull it out and use it again. And, I was like, I'm going to keep that. It'll be coming handy for any future things that might happen. But, and they were just handing those out, too, to people, just like they were handing out the water in the disaster boxes because it was a need, they were handing it out as a disaster supply. So it was like, yeah, I'll take one of those. Thank you very much. It's beautiful, the outpouring of love. I just wanted to let everybody know, thank you for the outpouring of love from Appalachia, Central Appalachia, in the wake of the spring flood. So we very much appreciate that. It's been a rough time. The biggest floods we've had here in a long time. It's not the biggest floods ever, but it is the biggest floods we've had in a long time. In a long time. The biggest floods since they put in all these dams and stuff, biggest floods in my lifetime, okay? And that's saying something. So it's been quite the adventure, and I came out of it real fortunate, because really the water issue is really the only thing I had to deal with. Some people, because I live on high ground, some people lost everything. So, but thank you so much, everybody, for your outpouring of love, and recovery efforts will continue. But I figured I'll go ahead and keep drinking the bottled water till it's gone. I don't know what I was talking about before I had to get the water down, but there is something I wanted to address, not related to floods or Michael Longley, but I've been doing this. There's this article coming out in November on LitHub, 100 notable small press books across all genres, right? And I'm reading and reviewing for the poetry genre. There's like 400 of us reviewers, and we're allowed to talk about what we're reading. We're allowed to post long form reviews if we already post reviews somewhere, which I do on my blog. We're not allowed to talk about or share who we send in our capsule reviews for. And anyway, in the end, we don't know who's going to end up in the article because there's an oversight committee who reads over all the capsule reviews and who chooses who ends up in the final article. You can imagine, because we're supposed to read broadly and then choose like 3 people to capsule review, or I don't know, it's like, and then there's going to be somebody choose out of our capsule reviews who ends up in the final article. So we don't even know who's going to end up in the final article, and there are going to be so many books involved that there's no way that we could ever give any of the people the books that we choose to read. There's no way we could even give you a shadow of an idea who's going to end up in that final article anyway, because we have to read so broadly. You know what I mean? But this is something that I've been wanting to talk about when it comes to the state of poetry today anyway, so I figured now's a good time to address it. There's a lot of talk right now about the attempt to, they call it identity erasure, the attempt to erase identity, and I don't know anything about that. As you can see, I'm not allowing that to happen to me. There's a lot of people who try to erase my identity on all sides. There are Native Americans who say there's no way I can be a Native American because blah blah blah. There are white people who say there's no way I can be a white person because blah blah blah. There are, I mean, and it's like, I don't care what anybody says. I know who I am. That's all that matters, right? I'm mixed, but I know who I am. That's all that matters. I don't need no DNA tests, and I don't need any. I know who I am. I don't need no papers. I don't need no certifications. I don't need nothing. I know who I am. And that's always been true. And it's funny because, you know, people are always projecting on you. I get people all the time that project on me thinking, well, if you would just figure out who you are. Seems like you just go from one thing to another, can't figure out what you like. No, I just like to do new things all the time. I like to stretch myself outside of my comfort zone. I'm adventurous like that. Doesn't mean I don't know who I am. You know, and it's like, you get people that project on you all the time. So people can try to erase your identity all they want. They ain't going to succeed in doing it unless you let them. People can't do nothing unless you let them. But so that identity erasure is not a problem. It's not a problem unless you allow it to be a problem. I don't care if the whole world and your mommy stands up in your face and says, you don't exist. I'm sorry, but you do. And ain't nobody can change that but you. Okay? So that's not a problem. But what is a problem, at least in poetry, are, and I think this is the publisher's fault, poetry that uses identity as wrappers. You know, say, okay, I'll use this as an example. You go to the store, you get a candy bar. It's wrapped up like a Kit Kat. You bite into it and it tastes like a Snickers. I like Snickers, but it's not a Kit Kat. So you buy Snickers, bite into it, tastes like a Snickers. Okay, that's fine because it's wrapped like a Snickers. So then you buy a Crunch Bar, bite into it, tastes like a Snickers. What's going on? It's supposed to be a Crunch Bar. Well, let's see. I'll get me a Three Musketeers, bite into it, it tastes like a Snickers. Is everything a Snickers? Well, let's see. I'll get me a, whatchamacallit. There is a candy bar called whatchamacallit if you're from another country. Oh, bite into it. It tastes like a Snickers too. What's up with that? But they're all in these different wrappers. Shouldn't they all be these different candy bars? Why do they all taste like Snickers? I have a problem with poetry that's like that. If I get a hold of a poetry book that says it's an indigenous poetry book, then it better read like an indigenous poetry book. If I get a hold of a poetry book that says it's this, I have trouble with poetry that's wrapped up in identity politics as a wrapper. But then once you get into it, and you're all excited, ooh, I'm going to read this indigenous book, or ooh, I'm going to read this book about this disabled. I'm really wanting to read more disabled poetry. Do disabled people have poet presses? Because that needs promoted. You hear a lot about LGBTQIA plus and BIPOC. What about disability presses, right? Where's that at? Okay. I'm going to make it like a mission to find these people and give them more press. If I can. Because you never hear about that. But it's like, and you get all excited because you're like, whoo, okay. But then you get down to it, and it's got, like, it has all this potential. Maybe it even uses words from an indigenous language or something, and you're like, oh, yeah. And then you get down into it, and but that turns out that's just the surface wrapper, but you bite into it, and it's just like a Snickers. It reads just like the white guy's poetry book I just read. Just like every other poetry book out there. It could literally be written by the same. It's like almost every poetry book printed by a traditional press, whether that be one of the big five presses or one of the more popular small presses, could be written by the same poet. I call it pop poetry. Some people call it workshopped to death. But it's a phenomenon that almost every well-read poet is familiar with. Where it's like, all the poetry is the same. It's just wrapped up in this wrapper that's, once you peel that back though, it's all the same. And they use identity as this surface thing to hook you and reel you in, but that's all it is. There's no meat to it. There's no depth to it. That's what I have a problem with. Okay? I don't have a problem with people writing from their identity. What I have a problem with is them using it as a crutch to hook a reader in, but then it serves no real purpose. There's no real depth to it. It's just a marketing scheme. It's just a gimmick. That's the word. It's just a gimmick. Because when you bite into that Kit Kat, it's just a Snickers. Actually, Snickers is my favorite candy bar, but the problem is, it's wrapped in a Kit Kat wrapping. Do you get my point? Because I love Kit Kats too. You get my point? That's what I have trouble with. It's like, if you're going to predicate your entire poetry career on your identity, and most people do, I try my best not to fall into that trap, because it gets you stuck in a box you can't get out of. And then when you want to write something else, you're stuck in that box and nobody wants to read it. Nobody wants to publish it because they see you in that one box. But if you're going to predicate your entire career on your identity, then make it mean something. Make it be more than just a wrapper. Make it be more than just your marketing gimmick. Make it have teeth. Make it have depth. Make it be more than just a few words from your language thrown in there. Write about it like you are writing from your soul. Not like you could literally be just the same poet, churning out the same poetry with this little veneer of identity on top. That's what I have a problem with. That's my rant. That's what I rant. That's my rant. And I'm telling you, I've been reading all these books as part of this project, And a lot of them are predicated around identity because that is how poetry is marketed right now and has been marketed for the last 20 years. That's just how poetry is marketed. They want to throw you in these boxes, slap a label on you. But it's like literally the same poet could have written all of these. I'm bored to death. And I'm all about writing from identity if it makes sense to do so. But you're not, most of these poets are only writing from that place because that's what their publisher wants them to do, because that's what sells. And you can tell. You can tell they are writing from that place because that's what sells, because that's what's expected, because that's the fashion and the fad, not because that's what's in their soul. And it's the same thing with writing from trauma. I'm all about writing out your traumas. In fact, most poets, that's how we start. We need a place to let our traumas out, and poetry is the safest place. That's how most of us start. But it has become, like, at least in terms of publishing our trauma, it has become something to write because it is a fad. The more shocking the poetry, the more likely it will be to sell. It's not from a genuine place. There is nothing genuine about it. That's what I'm talking about. Lack of genuineness. It's like the more shocking the trauma, it still reads like the same poet could have written this stuff. It still reads like all they did was change the cover, the title, and the name of the poet. I hate to say it, but it's true. And it's like, how many hundreds of poetry books do I have to read of the same poems where all they did was change the cover and the name of the poet and the title of the book? Wow me. Wow me. That's what you're supposed to be doing with poetry. You're supposed to wow me. You're supposed to move me. You're supposed to make me feel what you're feeling and see what you're seeing. You're supposed to rip my insides out. You're supposed to make me see the world in a new way. You're supposed to help me see your soul. And all I'm seeing is the same poet with a different name, different title, different cover of the book. You're using your identity and your trauma as a marketing gimmick. And we can tell. We can tell. That's why nobody reads poetry anymore. We can tell. That's the thing about not being genuine. We can tell. And we're bored. It bores us. Yawn. I just wasted a whole year of my life, is what I said to myself, while I put that 100 books away. It's not about identity erasure, because your identity is never in question as long as you believe it within your identity rests with you and you alone, sweetheart. As long as you're afraid your identity will be erased, honey, ain't nobody can help you. Because you're just letting people project all over you. Find what you're really passionate about, not what other people want to hear from you. Find what you really want to say and say that. And make us hear that. Make us hear the resonance of your soul. The resonance of your soul that only God hears. That's what poetry is. We don't give a flying flip what your identity is. We can see that. We want to feel the resonance. We want to feel the vibration of your soul that only God feels. And you can't fake that. And you can't market that. I would venture to think you can't even write that, really. That's what makes poetry so hard. That's why it's such an art. That's why we keep trying until we die. Stop sticking a Kit Kat wrapper on a Snickers. If you want a Snickers, make a Snickers. If you want a Kit Kat, make a Kit Kat. Okay? I'm sorry, but I have been doing this since I was 13 years old. And I'm getting real tired of the fake. So I'm just going to say it. Anyway, we're going to miss you, Michael Longley. We're going to miss all these Northern Irish poets, man. I still miss Seamus Heaney. I miss him like my grandpa. That's greatness. Yeats, Seamus Heaney. People like that, their names get that big for a reason. Because they write the resonance of their soul, the vibration of their soul that only God knows. And they don't even realize they're doing it. They're humble about it. Because they're not even trying to do it. See? They're just being themselves. Because they already know who they are. They already know who they are. They're just being them already. They're not trying too hard. Anyway, I hope you guys come back for more poetry another time. I have several videos lined up, as I mentioned, that need to go out because they have been sitting in storage for a long time, and there will be more coming in the future. Like I said, I have learned about the mirror belt, that should be an in-person only accessory, not on camera. Okay, no refracting light on the lens anymore. Sorry, you guys. I don't want to give anybody seizures or anything. And see you next time, okay? You have a fabulous, fabulous month. I wish good things for everybody. Only good, all the time. And thank you for joining me. And sorry for lecturing you, but I feel like it was necessary. Goodness. And take it as my mom, even though I've never had children, my mom says that I'm everybody's mother. So take it as advice from a mother to your soul. Because that's how it was meant. And love to all. Dona Dago Honey. Till we meet again.